Welcome to Dialogue. Today we're doing a deep dive into something that I think we rarely ever talk about with any real honesty. It's the afterlife of war.
Right. What happens after the headlines fade and the news cycle moves on?
Exactly. There's this public assumption that when the fighting stops, the conflict is over.
And that is a profound misunderstanding. For the combatant, for their family, the war doesn't end. It just moves.
It changes location.
Changes location. It trades the battlefield for, the living room, for the space inside your own head.
That's the core of it, isn't it? The silence that follows the fighting isn't peace. It's something else entirely. It's a fundamental shift.
It really is. You're trading the sound of gunfire for, say, the silence of insomnia at 3 in the morning, explosions for panic attacks.
And our mission here really is to look at those long-term costs, because things like addiction, homelessness, suicide, these aren't just random tragedies.
No, not at all. They are predictable results. They are the systemic outcomes of what we ask people to endure, not just physically, but psychologically and ethically.
And to be clear, this isn't a commentary on a soldier's patriotism or their choices. This is about peeling back a very comfortable, very sanitized narrative.
It's an anti-lie discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, asking a human being to harm another human being, no matter how professional the uniform is, that has a cost.
A cost that doesn't just go away.
It's never dismissed. It's just deferred. It's an invoice that comes due years, sometimes decades later, and it dismantles everything. Identity, values, relationships, long after the war is supposedly over.
Let's start right there. With that moment of return, there's this cultural script we all know, right? The hero's return.
Oh, absolutely. The big cinematic moment. Soldier gets off the plane, runs across the tarmac into the arms of their family.
And then they go home and resume their life. It's a very neat, very satisfying story.
And it's a total myth. That expectation of a seamless transition is, I think, the first and maybe the biggest obstacle to any kind of real healing.
Because you don't just return to the life you left.
You return to a state of profound displacement. The world expects you to just adjust back, flip a switch.
You can't just flip a switch when your entire operating system has been uninstalled and replaced with something else. I love this analogy of a failed software download.
It's a perfect analogy. You're trying to force a civilian life program, which is all about nuance and patience and ambiguity, onto a nervous system that has been hardwired for one thing: combat survival.
And the files are just not compatible.
They're completely incompatible. Think about what military training does. It spends years building very specific systems in you. Hyper-vigilance, you are always scanning your environment.
100% of the time.
Emotional suppression, you can't stop to process fear or grief in a firefight. You just can't. And rapid binary threat assessment. Is that a threat or not a threat? That's it.
So you bring that highly optimized binary system back home, and it immediately crashes into a world that is almost entirely gray area.
Exactly. Civilian life rewards the opposite. It rewards emotional openness. It demands patience. Think about waiting in a grocery store line. It requires you to tolerate ambiguity.
That's a great point. So if your brain is still running that combat OS, a crowded supermarket must feel,
What?
incredibly hostile.
Feels loud, unpredictable, and full of potential threats. The very training that kept you alive over there is now actively working against your peace of mind back here.
And historically, the way soldiers have been received just makes that displacement even worse.
Oh, absolutely. Look at Vietnam veterans. They often came home to open hostility, or just this cold, uncomfortable silence.
They're rejected.
Socially and structurally rejected.
Yeah.
Now, fast forward to the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. The open hostility is mostly gone, but it's been replaced by a kind of generalized indifference.
To thank you for your service at the gas station.
Right, which is well-intentioned, but it's hollow. There's no deeper engagement. But in both cases, hostility or indifference, the result for the individual is the same: profound displacement. You feel like an outsider. You're expected to be normal in a world that feels completely alien because your brain has been fundamentally rewired for survival, not normalcy. The old civilian self is gone.
We really have to stress this point. This isn't just a metaphor. It's not just a feeling. We're talking about actual physical, permanent changes to the brain.
Yes, concrete neurological alterations. Combat is basically a long series of peak stress events, and that physically reshapes your neural pathways, especially the ones that manage your stress response.
Which is why we see this whole catalog of after effects.
Yeah.
The hyperarousal, the insomnia, the rage, the emotional numbing.
All of it. And it leads to that core paradox we touched on. For the rewired brain, peace feels profoundly unsafe.
Which seems so counterintuitive. The threat is gone. You're home. Why would you feel less safe?
Because in a combat zone, as lethal as it is, it's often a very structured environment. You have clear orders, a clear mission, a clear enemy. Your nervous system knows how to operate in that structure.
It's a lethal clarity.
A lethal clarity. But civilian life is a flood of ambiguity. It's 1,000 tiny, low-stakes problems without a clear mission. Your brain is still running these sophisticated threat detection models, but there's no actual threat to lock onto.
So it's like a smoke detector that's had its sensitivity cranked up to 1,000. It goes off if you just make toast.
That's a perfect way to put it. The amygdala, which is your brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. It's screaming danger at the slightest provocation. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, is so flooded with stress hormones it can't function properly to say, hey, relax, it's just toast.
When people hear PTSD, the image that comes to mind is always the classic movie flashback, but you're saying it's so much more subtle, so much more a part of daily life.
The flashbacks are real for some, but they're just one small part of it. The more common symptoms are the ones we often miss, like the inability to feel real joy. The brain is so busy prioritizing survival that it doesn't have the bandwidth for pleasure.
And the constant scanning of the environment.
Yes. That's not just someone being fidgety. They are mentally mapping every exit, clocking every person who walks in the door, assessing every corner. The cognitive energy that takes is immense. It's utterly exhausting.
The emotional numbing, too, that has to be devastating for relationships.
It's one of the most destructive parts. Family and friends see it as coldness or detachment. They might even mistake it for strength.
He's handling it so well. He's so strong.
Exactly. When in reality, it's a psychological defense mechanism. The system is so overloaded with everything it saw and did that it just flips a circuit breaker to protect itself from a total meltdown.
Let's use that specific example you mentioned before we started. The veteran who snaps at a sudden noise in a grocery store. Break that down for us neurologically.
Okay, so a jar of pickles drops and shatters. To everyone else, it's just a startling noise. They see the veteran's reaction, maybe they duck or yell, and they think it's a massive overreaction.
They see the stimulus as just a loud noise.
But for the veteran's brain, it's not about the volume. It's about the unpredictability of the stimulus. Their fight-or-flight system is already idling at maximum. It never got the signal that the war is definitively over.
So that sudden, sharp, unexpected sound registers as what? An IED. An ambush.
It registers simply as an unidentified threat that has to be neutralized right now. The rational part of the brain, the part that says it's just a jar, gets completely bypassed. The amygdala hijacks the system because speed is more important than nuance for survival.
And that system, which is designed to save your life in one context, ends up costing you your peace of mind in another.
Costs you your peace, your relationships, your ability to just exist in the world. You're living 24/7 with an engine that's redlining, waiting for an attack that you logically know isn't coming, but your body is absolutely convinced is imminent.
This brings us to another concept that's just as critical as PTSD, but maybe less understood. Moral injury.
Yes, and it's so important to differentiate the two, even though they often happen together.
So if PTSD is at its core a fear-based trauma, a wound to your sense of physical safety,
Then moral injury is a value-based trauma. It's a wound to your soul. It's what happens when you participate in, or even just witness, acts that violate your deepest sense of right and wrong.
it's an attack on your very sense of self, on your meaning.
Precisely. It happens in a few specific points. First, when you do something or fail to stop something that goes against your conscience. Second, and this one is crucial, is betrayal by leadership.
Betrayal.
When you're ordered to do something or you see leaders make decisions that fundamentally contradict the values you were told you were fighting for, the whole ethical framework just collapses.
The idea that you're there to protect the innocent, and then you're part of an action that leads to civilian casualties?
That's a classic example.
Yeah.
Or violent night raids based on faulty intelligence. Or just being part of a mission where the rules of engagement feel morally wrong. The problem isn't just the memory of the event itself.
It's that the system you trusted put you in that position.
Exactly. The consequence isn't a bad memory you have to process. The consequence is that you lose the blueprint for how to live with yourself. If your core values are shattered, how do you know who you are anymore? How do you look your kids in the eye?
Which is why some of the standard therapies for PTSD don't work for moral injury.
Right. You can't use exposure therapy to desensitize someone to the belief that they've violated their own soul. The problem isn't a fear of a memory. It's a crisis of meaning. caused by the action itself.
So the internal question changes. It's not, am I safe anymore?
Yep.
It's, am I a good person? Or even, is there any good in the world at all? That's a much deeper, more complex wound.
And that ties into a really fundamental biological truth, which is that as a species, we are not naturally wired to kill each other on a massive scale.
Not at all. We have deep, ancient instincts against it. The sheer amount of resources and psychological conditioning that militaries have to invest to override that instinct is proof of how strong it is.
There was that famous study from World War II, right? SLA Marshall's study. It found that only about 15 to 20% of riflemen actually fired their weapon at an enemy soldier. Most fired over their heads or not at all. So militaries completely changed their training.
They shifted from bullseye targets to human-shaped silhouettes.
Exactly. And they used drills that made firing an automatic, conditioned response, not a conscious decision. The conditioning is incredibly effective for the mission, but there's a huge trade-off.
It conditions the behavior, but it can't delete the conscience.
The psyche keeps receipts, and that bill comes due later, once the external structure of the war is gone. All of that suppressed moral and emotional data comes flooding back.
And that's when you see the intense guilt, the shame, the withdrawal.
The self-imposed isolation, this agonizing crisis about what you did, who you were, it's a cruel irony, really. Many soldiers struggle so much more after the war is over.
Because during the war, there was a mission, there was purpose, there was the support of your unit.
And the adrenaline of pure survival. Once all that is stripped away, you're left alone with the receipts. We see it with Vietnam veterans still processing things 50 years later.
And we see it in the modern context with something like drone operators. That's a fascinating example.
It is. They are physically safe, thousands of miles away, but they're experiencing profound trauma, PTSD, and moral injury at rates comparable to ground troops.
So the physical distance doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter at all to the conscience. They often have a high-definition view of a target for hours, sometimes days, before a strike. They see the person living their life. They see the strike. They see the aftermath. The psyche registers the lethal act, not how far away the body was.
The training successfully overrode the reluctance to act, but it can't erase the human capacity to reflect on that action.
It just moves the consequence to a different time and place. It moves it into their future.
Let's shift a bit, because not all injuries are psychological or moral. Some are invisible, physical time bombs.
The latent injuries. The ones that incubate for years and then suddenly appear. This is one of the most devastating parts of the war's afterlife. The war ends, but for these veterans, the illness clock has just started ticking.
We're talking about chemical and environmental exposures.
Yes. For Vietnam, the obvious one is Agent Orange, a defoliant that was contaminated with dioxin. Decades later, you see this wave of aggressive cancers, neuropathies, all sorts of horrific conditions.
And for the more recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, the big one is the burn pits.
The burn pits. Just try to imagine this. Huge open-air pits, some as big as a football field, where they burned all the base's trash.
And by all the trash, what do we mean?
Everything. Plastics, batteries, medical waste, tires, unexploded ordnance, paint, solvents, even amputated body parts. Smoke was this thick, black, toxic cloud that just hung over the bases for years.
A cocktail of carcinogens that people were breathing in constantly.
Constantly. And now, years later, we're seeing the results. Severe respiratory diseases like constrictive bronchiolitis, which basically scars your lungs, rare cancers, neurological disorders.
And what's truly heartbreaking is the impact on their children.
Yes, significant birth defects and health problems in the children of exposed veterans, which suggests the damage is happening at a genetic level. The war is literally being passed down to the next generation.
The biological damage is done, and then the illness appears years later. And that's when a whole new war begins.
The bureaucratic war. This is the systemic cruelty of it all. The system that exposed you to the poison then forces you to fight a grueling battle to prove it.
You have to prove, first, that you were even there.
Right. You have to prove the exposure happened, which is hard when records are spotty. Then you have to prove your illness is real, and then, the hardest part, you have to prove a scientific link between the two.
And you're often arguing against the very government agencies that have a vested interest in denying that link to limit their liability.
It's an exhausting, soul-crushing process that drains what little energy, money, and health these veterans have left. It's a slow-motion catastrophe managed by paperwork.
And this whole burden, all these different injuries, they aren't carried by the veteran alone. We have to talk about the families.
The unpaid co-soldiers. They serve without ever putting on a uniform.
The spouse at home. just waiting, the uncertainty, the fear.
It's immense. They're managing everything, the finances, the house, being a single parent, all while carrying this chronic anxiety for their loved one's safety.
And then the person comes home, and it's not the person they remember.
That's the post-deployment shock. They've been holding on to this memory, and the person who walks through the door is fundamentally altered. They're living with a hyper-vigilance, the emotional numbing, the hair-trigger temper.
War doesn't stop at the front door.
It moves right into the house. It sits at the dinner table. It gets into bed with you at night. The war becomes a third person in the marriage.
What does that do to the partner, the spouse?
They often end up with what's called secondary traumatic stress. They're constantly walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate triggers, managing outbursts, dealing with this emotional ghost. It leads to incredible strain, high divorce rates, and just utter exhaustion.
And the kids absorb all of it.
Kids are like emotional sponges. They internalize the unpredictability. They see the unexplained anger, then the long periods of silence. They start to learn that their home is not a safe, predictable place.
They inherit the anxiety.
They do. They start to model the hypervigilance themselves. They learn that the world is a dangerous place because they see their parent treating it that way, even if they don't know why.
The veteran thinks they're protecting them by not talking about it.
But the trauma is transmitted non-verbally. The entire family unit gets sick. But our system is only set up to see the veteran as the patient. The family is left to fight the aftermath alone.
Beyond the family, there's also this crisis of identity that happens when service ends.
Oh, it's a huge one. In the military, your identity is clear. You have a rank, a mission, a brotherhood. It gives you a profound sense of purpose.
And then you leave, and you're thrown into the civilian world, which is vague.
It's messy. The transition from mission critical, where your actions have life or death stakes, to an office job where the biggest crisis is, please circle back on this email. It's more than jarring. It's an identity collapse.
You're left asking these huge questions. Who am I now? What matters? Where do I belong?
And this identity crisis feeds directly into the economic problems so many veterans face.
It's like a triple whammy, isn't it?
It is. First, you've lost crucial years for education or building a career. Second, and this is a big one, your skills often don't translate.
This is where that dark humor comes in, right?
Yeah.
Trying to write a resume.
It's absurd. You might have been responsible for millions of dollars of equipment and the lives of a dozen people in a high-stress, complex environment.
Manage logistics for convoy security under sustained enemy fire.
And the recruiter sees military and their eyes glaze over. They ask you, can you work collaboratively in a high-pressure environment? And you just want to laugh.
Or scream.
Or scream. So you're forced to sanitize your experience. And then you add the third layer, the physical and mental injuries we've talked about, which make holding down a 9-to-5 incredibly difficult.
And it creates this downward spiral. Underemployment, debt, stress.
Which puts more strain on the family, which worsens the mental health issues. The very stability you fought for is the one thing you can't find when you get home.
And when that spiral continues, it leads to the most visible sign of our systemic failure: veteran homelessness.
And we have to stop talking about this as an individual failing. It is not a moral collapse.
Yeah.
It's a slow process of attrition. It's a system failing one person at a time.
It's the delays in getting benefits.
It's the relationship breaking down under the strain of trauma. It's the untreated mental health issues that make a job impossible. It's the silent pride that stops them from asking for help until it's too late.
And you end up with that brutal irony. The person who defended the country is now fighting for a spot under a bridge.
It is the definition of policy neglect. A slow, structural abandonment.
Which leads us to the final, most painful outcome. The unspoken war. The high rate of suicide.
We have to talk about it, and we have to frame it correctly. It does not happen because a person is weak. It happens because multiple systems, one after another, failed them completely.
Let's connect the dots we've laid out. How do they lead to this?
You see the total collapse. First, their sense of meaning collapses. That's the moral injury and the loss of identity. Second, the external support collapses, the economic crisis, the bureaucratic neglect. Third, the internal pain, the insomnia, the guilt, the hyperarousal. It just outlasts their ability to cope.
When that isolation becomes total, suicide starts to look like a solution.
It feels like the only way to end an unbearable internal pain that the outside world has refused to acknowledge or treat. This is not a tragedy by accident. It is an outcome by design. If you create these conditions, this will be the result.
Which brings us to the social part of this. The way we, as a society, refuse to really look at the problem.
We prefer the medication model. We treat a deep, systemic moral wound as if it's an individual brain chemical imbalance that can be fixed with a prescription.
Medication can be a vital tool, obviously.
Of course, but if that's all you offer, you're ignoring the moral and social dimensions of the injury. You're basically saying, we broke you for a policy decision, now here's a pill so you can be quiet about it.
It's a collective deflection, isn't it? Because really looking at it would force us to ask some very uncomfortable questions.
Deeply uncomfortable questions. It would force us to question the necessity of the wars themselves, to confront our collective responsibility for the lifelong cost. Not just a yellow ribbon on a car, but real, sustained, expensive care.
And it would mean admitting the damage is permanent.
Yes, that it's not a temporary problem we can fix and forget about. And it's easier to stand for a moment of applause at a ball game than it is to commit to the hard, expensive work of lifelong care.
So if we cut through all the slogans and the parades, what does real honor actually look like?
Real honor is structural. It's action. It's guaranteed, no questions asked, lifelong health care for every single injury, visible and invisible.
It's support for the whole family.
Full support for the spouses and the children. It's honest narratives about what war actually costs. And most of all, it's accountability before we send people. A much higher bar for going to war in the first place.
Because at the end of the day, the people who are most permanently damaged by war are almost never the ones who chose to start it.
That's the cruelest part. They bear the weight on the battlefield. The very least we could do is help carry that weight when they come home.
When the guns fall silent, that's when the hardest fighting really begins. And it happens inside long after the rest of us have forgotten. We have to stop asking them to carry that weight alone. If you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Also, let us know in the comments what really stood out to you in this conversation and if there's any related topic or new topic that you would like covered in a future video.